Hello everybody, my name is Steve Balogh. We're here at the College of St. Rose. It's October 9th, 2003, and we wanted to document my parents' life story a little bit. So we got together, and it's myself and my brother Peter and my parents. So Peter, why don't you take us along and get us started?
Great. Thanks, Stevie. Again, my name is Peter Balogh, and basically I'm just going to carry my parents through their journey over the past 70 some odd years, so we'll just go right there. First thing we'd like you to do, my father's name is Sandor, my mother's name is Sara. Just kind of introduce yourself, Mom, first, a little bit about your family, your parents' names, dates of birth, and then we'll shift over to Dad. So if you could do that, please.
My name is Sara. I was born Baranyai Sarika in Tihany in 1935. My parents were István Baranyai and Mária Sörös. They were born in 1908 and 1912. And as I said, I was born in 1935. And
Your brothers and sisters.
oh yeah, I forgot. I have one brother and two sisters. I grew up in a very, very lovely family, and we got married with my husband in 1956, and here we are. And we'll tell you the life story between the
Real
next
quick,
46.
what's the names of your brothers and sisters, and
Oh.
who's the oldest and youngest?
Yeah, I am the oldest. My brother's name is István. He was born in 1939. My sister's name is Kato. She was born in 41. And I have a sister. Her name is Rosie, and she was born in 1948.
Dad?
I was born in 1931, and my parents, my father is also Sandor. He was born in 1906, and my mother was born in 1903. She's Julia. And they had altogether 4 children. One, he was also Sandor. He was born and died before I was born. And my sister is younger. She was born in 1934, and she's Yolan. And I had another brother who died also when he was about 2 weeks old. He would have been the youngest. My parents had a grocery store in a fairly large-sized village in Hungary, and I grew up helping them and spending a great deal of time in the grocery store. So I have some experience in that field.
Okay. How many Sandors were there? Generations, real quick. I know there were like...
I am number 5. It was a tradition in the family that the firstborn son was always named Sandor. And actually, I was number 6. The one before me who died, that was number 5. So and it goes on the tradition.
Okay. What we'd like to do now is basically spend a few minutes telling us a little bit about what it was like growing up for you. So, Mom, if you would start, just tell us a couple little stories or what it was like growing up in Hungary, in Tihany.
And Tihany is a peninsula, a very, very lovely village. I don't have much recall of my childhood. I was very young at that time. But I remember my father went to the war. Should I mention it?
Yes,
In 1939. And at one time we got a letter from the Red Cross that my father was dead. So here was my mother with the 3 of us little children trying to survive. And I remember many struggles for survival, how she baked bread, how the stores were closed for many, many years.
Tell us more. We'll get to the war in a little bit. Tell us more about the bread, going to school,
Or
the
bread.
ducks, the
How
storks.
did you make bread?
How I didn't make bread, but my mother did. As I said, in the early 40s, the stores were closed. So just imagine your life without going to the supermarket or buy a pair of shoes. I remember I didn't have new shoes for years, and I was just dreaming. I was about 7, 8 years old. What would it be to go to the store and they would measure your feet and buy a pair of new shoes? I had somebody's old shoes, but we survived. And I remember my mother had a dear friend who had beautiful clothes, so we would exchange something for food. And this lady had, let's say, a shirt. They would walk about 5 miles to the mill to exchange the shirt for flour. So they would walk home 5 miles. And the next morning, all I remember is my mother had the dough for the bread. And then around 9 o'clock, I had to carry the dough in a basket to the baker. And by that time, the baker had the oven all full of amber. And how when I got there, I would put my little name there, Baranyai Sarika or Baranyai István, and he would wet it on top, put my bread in the oven, and 3-4 hours later, I would go back and get a loaf of bread. So this is, but we survived, and here I am. So we struggled, but it was fun.
Dad?
She did mention that there were no school buses at that time, and she had to walk to school about 5-6 miles, winter, summer, whenever. And as far as I'm concerned, my memories are basically the same. But my parents had a grocery store, so we had flour and we had all the necessities through the store. And we had the same situation with baking the bread. Every week, 3 days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the baker heated up that oven, and everybody from the whole village took the bread there, and that bread lasted a week or so. I remember also I went to school with a train, and sometimes the train was too late, so we didn't even bother to go in. Or when the train didn't come, sometimes we walked about 12 miles to school. But it was fun. We grew up all right, and
Let's mention we didn't have television.
there
didn't
was
have
no
telephone.
television. So Peter asked us before, what did we do in the evening? We went to bed early. No television. My father was the first one in the village to have radio, and we had an accumulator or a kind of a battery that powered the radio, and it was the only one. And I remember around 7 o'clock when the news came on, half of the village was outside of our window, and my father used to put the speaker in the window, and that's how the village was informed of. That was the time when the war was about to break out, World War II.
And
What village?
Kiskomárom.
And let's remember, we didn't have electricity, no electricity, and we had no running water for a couple of years because the war. How did we get the news? There was the Bíró mi az?
There was a guy who went around
With the
town
drum, and he would stop at every street corner, and he would have the news. And when we heard the drummer, that's the truth. Everybody got to the little front of the house, and
Like a
we heard the
town-
news.
like
The
a
war
town
broke
crier.
out. Where can you buy this? Where can you buy that? Who wants to exchange what? This is the way we got the news for a couple of years. But we did.
Do you remember the price of
We were
anything at that
informed.
point in time? How much anything was? Did you see cars?
Oh, no cars. The price, what about price? The inflation was so bad, nobody had money. But I remember, no, I have to tell you one story. When my father built a house, we have a lovely, lovely house. We still do, 1941. He borrowed 600 forint, from the bank. So the inflation comes, the war comes, and with the inflation going so high, when an egg was 600 forint, my mother was so smart. She paid the loan back.
No,
So we never owned any money for the house after that. So when my dad came home from the war in 1947, he said to my mother, I remember that, I was just a little girl, he says, we have to pay the loan back. My mother says, no, we don't. We are already paid. And so.
About cars, my father did have a car, and he used to use the car also to buy supplies for the store. But I remember one story which was cute. I loved it. He hired a horse and wagon to go to the nearest city to get stuff for the store, and it turned out it was a Jewish holiday. And all the stores were closed because the wholesalers were 90% Jews. So he thought something different. He went to the state warehouse where they sold salt. So he brought home a wagon load of salt. And he started to spread the word that because of the war there is not going to be any salt. So they had a run on the salt, and 2 days later the whole supply was sold out.
Yeah.
You made a great segue, Mom, to the war. So the war broke out, and can you tell us a little bit about your father's history with the war, and then what it was like to be at home without your father? Spend a couple minutes on that.
My father was telling me that he was in the war and how one day he ended up in Strasbourg. You remember when he was telling us the story? And I said to my dad,
Strasbourg is where?
in France,
Thank you.
in France. So I said, Dad, you know where France is? So my father was, yes, I do. I was there. I said, how did you get to France? They walked. The whole army walked to France. And I said,
Which is like us in Albany walking to where?
from Albany to probably Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
I said, and how did 1,000 people? And I said, what did you eat? He says, whatever. They carried like a flame stove or stuff, whatever. But they cooked for the army. And I said, silly. I said, and how did you go back? He says, the same way. Can you imagine walking home from Strasbourg, France? And, well, anyway, he comes home and
Where did he sleep?
under the sky, he said.
Under the stars.
Under the cloud, under the stars,
Stars.
he said. Yeah. And then we heard a letter that he was dead, so he was my mother with the 3 of us. And
when he came back, you didn't recognize him.
and then one day he walked home after a few years. Yeah.
And he had
of
beard
course
and
we
beard?
didn't recognize him. He was 38 years old. He had gray hair and beautiful chestnut brown
Beard.
beard. He was adorable.
And you were playing on the street and you
Did
didn't
nobody
recognize.
recognize him. There was my little brother who was about 5, 6, and he says, oh, that guy looks just like a doctor in the village. And somebody says, of course, that doctor is your dad. That's the way it was.
So he shows up at the door one day?
Not at the door. He didn't come home because he wasn't sure if we are alive or not. So he stopped somewhere else and asked, is my family alive? And that's the way it was.
So while
and
he
we
was-
walked up to the street and met him.
So while he was gone, what was happening in the house in a couple minutes? I mean, did you hear bombs dropping? Did you hear machine guns? Did you hear tanks?
We heard the bombs, and I remember one case that we heard the bomb coming. My mother wasn't home. Probably she was working on some survivor story or whatever. So me and my brother and sister at that time, we were running. There was a bunk, a cellar. Oh, I don't know, the 5th house from up there. And when my brother and sister went into the cellar, I looked back. In front of the house, Lech Bácsi's house was bombed already. So that's all I
bomb dropped
remember.
right next door to your house.
Right next to my house. But we survived. We survived. And nobody died in that event either.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I remember. Yeah.
I remember most vividly the day when the Russians came in. The Germans left without any fight. So the Russians came in on Easter Sunday morning.
1945.
1945. And before that, we knew that the Russians are close by, so everybody took all the valuable stuff to the hills, and people who lived there, we left some of our stuff with them. But finally, when the Russians came, there was no fight, and this was close to the Croatian border, and they evacuated the city because fighting was still going on in Croatia. And they let a few people stay there. Next door there was a barber, and they let the barber stay there so that he could shave and cut the hair of the occupying forces. And my father talked to him, and he took me as an apprentice so we could stay. So there were only 2 of us in that half of the village. the barber and me. And I was working there. I was putting the shaving cream on the guys, and I didn't dare shave them, because if I would cut them, I was afraid they might shoot me or they get angry. So we escaped the evacuation, and I got tips from, actually it was in our village, Bulgarian troops, not Russians. And I learned from them that in the Bulgarians, they say yes and they say no. And also when they want to call somebody, they say, come here, and it's almost like kind of go away. And I got cigarettes from them, and by that time I stopped smoking. I was 13. I smoked before, but my father gave me a spanking Saturday evening, so that Sunday morning I couldn't sit down in church. So I saved all the cigarette, and we used that to exchange for food and other stuff, because by that time our store was empty. People took everything.
Can you tell us a little bit, now we're going to jump a little bit ahead to about 1951, and you're in seminary school, and tell us a little bit about what happened with that, with prison.
Okay, in the seminary I was my third year, 2.5 more years to be ordained a priest, and I was the editor of the seminary's bulletin board paper. We didn't have printed newspapers like the schools have here.
No internet?
No internet, no. We had a typewriter and a bulletin board, and on the anniversary of the arrest of Cardinal Minsanti, we put out a little reminder and a prayer, and also some of the other seminarians wrote articles about the church that was demolished by the communists in Budapest to build a statue of Stalin, and a few other things. So we got arrested. We had a spy in the seminary who told the authorities what we did, that we are praying for Cardinal Minsanti. And so they took the paper, we got arrested, and transferred to Budapest from this village of Veszprém. And I was, there were 6 of us, one professor, and he was also the spiritual leader of the seminary, and 5 students. And the same judge who sentenced Cardinal Minsanti to life imprisonment, and I got a 6-year sentence. The priest, the professor, the spiritual leader, he got 9 years, and 2 of us got 5 years. And I spent 5 of...
Tell us about your lawyer. What happened with, how did you get a lawyer?
Hang on, before you do that, this was the communist country by now?
Yes.
So it was communist from what point in time?
From 1946, but it got much worse in 1948.
Okay.
And this happened in 1952.
Okay.
That I was arrested. And
Your lawyer?
the lawyer. We were in detention, and nobody knew from the family, nobody knew where we were taken. They took us from the seminary at night. I was sleeping in the room, and I woke up around 2 o'clock, somebody was shaking me. And there was 2 guys, one with a submachine gun pointing at me, says, get up, get dressed, and come with us. And so after that, nobody knew where we were. So they couldn't hire a lawyer, and on the morning when we had the trial, we were taken up to the courthouse. We were in the courthouse, but to the hall where the trial was going to be. And about a half hour before the trial started, and they introduced to the 6 of us 3 guys. Says, these are your lawyers. These 2 gets this one, these 2 gets. So 2 of us had a lawyer. That's the first time when we met them. And we told them, look, we are innocent. What we did, I mean, they had the evidence about the bulletin board paper. They had all the articles. Says, but this is not a crime. In the Hungarian constitution, it says there is freedom of speech, freedom of press. And the lawyer says, look, the best thing is if you say you are guilty and ask the mercy of the court. Says, no, we are not guilty. Then you are a fool, the lawyer said, and he turned away. That was our lawyer.
So you were guilty.
We were guilty, and I got a 6-year sentence, and I spent 3 years of the 6 in a coal mine. There was an amnesty after Stalin died, and also in the coal mine, if you work over a certain percentage point or over 100%, for every 2%, they wrote off a day. So I worked off a year and 7 days. I was working as an electrician. So they were asking from us prisoners who had certain trades, and at first they hired all the real electricians, and they still needed some. And I was always interested in electricity, and they gave me a 30-day trial period, and it worked out. So I worked as an electrician. When I was discharged, I put in my ID booklet, occupation electrician, qualifications none. So, and then when I got out, I got a job as an electrician through a friend of mine who became an engineer in a construction company. But in the prison, there were 300 of us in the coal mine, and we had civilians who provided the leadership and the experience, and the prisoners, we did most of the work. But I first was operating machinery like pump or fans, and then I became an electrician, and that's how.
Were you in a cell and shackled?
No, in the coal mine, we had a big halls that were built just for us, 100 people in a hall, and 50 on each side, and in the center was the basins to wash up and the toilets. We were free, and within the barbed wires, we were free. We had a football team, and we could walk around in our spare time.
Okay. We'll shift now, move up ahead in time and go to how you guys met. We'll spend a couple minutes there. And
okay.
Go from there.
My sister worked with my wife
So you got
in the
out in
same
54.
office.
You
I
got out
got
of
out
prison in
in
54.
55.
Okay.
And in February 55. And my sister and my wife worked in the same office. And in her village, which is a beautiful resort area, they had a motorcycle, an international motorcycle competition every St. Stephen's Day, every August 20th. So we decided to go out, and my wife arranged that we would park our bicycles at her house.
Not the car, the bicycle.
The bicycle, and take over. So that's how we met, and we spent the whole day at the motorcycle races, and that was the beginning. And
But you had said you had heard of him before you met. Tell me, how did you hear about him?
Yeah. As he mentioned, I worked with his sister. Both of us were secretaries. So she would tell me sometimes that I have to go home, we have to bake because we are going to visit my brother. So where is his brother? Nobody else knew in the whole company. There were about 1,000 workers. Nobody knew. You are not proud of your brother being in a prison. But there was nothing to be ashamed of, because in Hungary, to be in political prisoner wasn't nothing to be ashamed of, but nobody knew anyway. So she said she's going up, so they are going to visit. So I said, why, what happened? So she would tell me the story why he was in prison. So I heard of him, but I have never met him until that
tell the
motorcycle
story
race.
after the motorcycle is what your mother.
So we went to the motorcycle race. My husband was an adorable. He really was young, intelligent,
Is the key.
handsome, tall, my kind of guy. So we go home, and my mother, when they left, my mother said, Shari, that guy is meant just for you. And a year later, that day, we got married. But for about the next 6 months, we didn't it wasn't like nowadays you go out with the guy and you take him
movies.
home and you go to the movies and all that jazz.
We did go to movies, but
We did. No, later.
Yeah, so, because I know you have 2 wedding dates. Tell us about those.
Well, one wedding date was the August 19th or the 20th because his sister was going to get married, but before they got married, they decided with her engaged boyfriend they would like to build a house. But at that time, you didn't get loan unless you were married. So we decided they can get married on paper and on the same day that we did, August 19th. So
That was
this way
the
they got the
civil
loan.
marriage.
That was, the
and
civil
then we
marriage.
joined them, and
This was just a civil marriage. So after the wedding, my mother made a little, just the 5 of us, 2 witnesses, right?
Yeah.
And the 4 of us. He went home, and they went home, and then 2 weeks later, we really got married in church, and that's the wedding that we
The reason is that
celebrate.
for the honeymoon, we wanted to go to a resort place, but the union handles all these requests, so they gave us the date to the this place for our honeymoon on August 6th.
No.
So we got September 6th. So we got married the day before, and then we have the wedding party there, and we went to get on the train. So we arrived on our honeymoon on September 6th.
on the 6th.
So that's why we have 2. One is the civil marriage before the justice of peace, and then the church wedding was 2 weeks later.
Where'd you go on your honeymoon?
Lira Firad, it's a beautiful resort area which was built for the aristocracy in the 1930s, and then the state appropriated it, and it was all union. You had to go, everybody's a member of the union, and you had to request the date from the union.
So you're married. Tell us now a little bit about the revolution, your escape, and give us a little bit of specifics about dates and your trip over here.
Okay, we were married in September. We got home from the honeymoon, and by that I had to change a job from my earlier job, which was about 40 miles from Tihany, and I got a job at the same ship factory where she worked. That was the largest shipyard or ship factory in Central Europe. About 700 people worked there, and they built even some ocean-going small ships, but I mean large, small ocean-going. And I was there, and on October 22nd, we heard on the radio that there were demonstrations in Budapest, and the next day, on October 23rd, they started shooting and fighting, and the revolution broke out. And the shipyard, we went on strike in sympathy of the revolution, and I made a few speeches. They elected me into the Workers' Council at the Revolution Council at the shipyard. There were some 20 members, and when the Russians came back and attacked on November 4th, situation really started to get hot. We continued to make speeches, and we were on strike. So finally, they made an attempt to arrest me in a store. A guy, a local Communist Party secretary, wanted to arrest me, and I raised my voice, and everybody was watching us, so I escaped. But we decided that we better leave the country, and so we took a truck. Truck had to go to the border, the Austrian border, because somebody prior to that stole the car of the shipyard, and they wired back that your car is here on the border, come and pick it up. So we sent a